My first priority is where are you at in your life and where's your heart? My first job is not business owner. It's not a boss. My first job is a fellow believer in Christ. Everything else is secondary. And so that's changed how I look at my business and how I look at people in my business.
How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to What Matters Media. I'm Matthew Baker, and today we talk with my friend Christian Lopez. He's an amazing videographer, father, husband, and he talks a little bit about how in his journey he went from just kind of living around faith to really living faith out practically. And he gave some really amazing advice on how to do that. So thanks for tuning in. Let's get to the interview. How's it going, Christian?
It's going.
I'll take your glasses for you.
Oh, thanks, dude. You spraying my hair with Jack Daniel, man?
Yeah.
Nah.
So, man, Christian, I met you probably about a year ago, but I started coming to, going to our church, but at the time, your church.
Yeah, right,
and kind of met you along the way, just singing, doing stuff with the worship team. Mm-hmm. And, it's been cool getting to know you, and especially in the past, couple years. So, if you would just give me a little background of where you came from, where kind of your life, do you have your family background, where your faith kind of started?
Depending on how far back you want to go.
Yeah,
I mean,
just simply.
Yeah.
Nothing too deep. But.
No, you're good, man. I would say I've always grown up in a Christian household.
Yeah.
And so my dad was actually the singer in the house, along with his side of the family. But I grew up in a Christian household, and I knew the things of the Lord, of God, knew about God and stuff like that. But I didn't really have a personal relationship with Him. Mm-hmm. And you grow up knowing these things because your parents kind of, teach you and instill this. You go to church and, all that stuff. But, things started to really shake for me when I got married.
Okay.
To be honest with you. When I got married, I think marriage is one of those things where you really learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
So if you really want to learn a lot about yourself, get married, and there's not a lot you learn about yourself, when you're not with somebody who literally is living with you and getting to see who you are every single day.
Yeah.
Getting to see you at your best, getting to see you at your worst.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge because you can, in a way, be real with this person as to your mood and who you are and what what's going on. But at the same time, it's you can't pretend because you live with this person. And they know if you're lying, if you're if you're telling the truth of how you feel. And I'm a horrible liar, man. So for me, it's really hard. My wife can tell when there's something off or stuff like that. But and so through that, learning about that, in marriage and learning about myself through that, it's been interesting how God has really used that to point out to me how much I need Him. And so it wasn't until fast forward, learning about this stuff. It wasn't until September of 2020 where my life really, the Lord really took my life and was yo, I'm stepping in now, and I'm gonna change you from the inside out.
Yeah.
I'm going to, refine you into something that is for His purpose and His glory. And I've never been the same since then, to be completely honest.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So were you and your wife just on different pages? Once you got married, did you realize you're on different pages with where you were in faith?
Looking back, I would say we barely talked about the Lord. in our relationship. I know that we both still believe that God was very much real, but I don't think we were as passionate about, a relationship with God as we are now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like, it's funny because we talk about it all the time. We're like, yeah, when we're, in our beginning stages of marriage, we really didn't talk about the Lord much. So yeah, we knew the Lord because we grew up with it,
Yeah.
But the minute I started putting God first in my life, when a really good spiritual mentor in my life encouraged me to do that. When I started putting God first and reading the Bible, which is really the only way that we can really understand and know who God is.
Yeah.
That began to completely transform my life. And I knew it transformed my life because when I started doing that, the honesty that came from the depths of my heart started to begin to pour out into my wife. And just being transparent with our past and what we've been through.
Yeah.
One of the hardest, honestly, decisions that I had to make and to trust God in. There's secrets that are buried in there that you think like, oh, I'm going to take these secrets to the grave, like I'm not, no one's ever going to know about this.
Not going back there, so it doesn't matter. It just
correct.
Be good.
Correct. Yeah, dude, exactly. That was my thought process. And then, God changing my life and understanding who Jesus was and how he is the reason why I have life.
Yeah.
And why I can live for eternity, or anyone can live for eternity. When I understood who he was and what he actually did, not just through what I grew up knowing who Jesus was, like healing people and doing that stuff, like that was like a I would say out of the grand scheme of things, that was like the most minor thing about Jesus that we understand. It's like, oh yeah, he did good teachings and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's way more to him than that. And so, so learning about that and learning that and understanding that, there's a God out there who loves us so much that he decides to, be a man and die for something that we could never, die for.
Yeah.
And pays that penalty. It shows his goodness, and it's very freeing to know that it's not up to you to decide whether you go up to heaven. It's about you trusting in someone who's already done that for you, know? So yeah, understanding that has changed my perspective. It's brought out so much honesty within my heart to my wife and how I treat her and how I open up to her in a way that I never did before,
Yeah.
And it's brought our relationship even so much closer. And I can see how God has been using, me in growing closer with him and how that's encouraged my wife to also step into that as well. And, my wife is awesome. She's incredible. She's now leading a women's Bible study, which is something that she would have never done, but because of how she has trusted God and how he's changed my life, she's able to do that now, and step into that.
That is really cool.
Yeah. No, it's really neat.
What I think is neat is sometimes I can see you guys and think, oh, they're pretty awesome. They must have just, not that you actually would think this, but just subconsciously think they must have always just been awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They must have always just been at this place in their life. But it's really quite fresh in your life for as far as the scheme of your life. And it's cool to see how much God can do in a short time. When we just say, hey, it's yours. It's not me, it's yours. And
right.
Something else that I was thinking about is there's something really powerful when kind of a man steps out and takes responsibility for his family.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guys that are real passive, and if you look at the church, most there's just a growing, most people at like leadership conferences and different things like that nowadays have been predominantly more women or in worship type things. And you see that men kind of taking a back seat a lot of places.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should ever be like a competition of like, there's always going to be a little bit more or a little bit less.
Yeah.
But you can see where men have a lot of times in this kind of day and age taken a back seat and said, we'll just let it happen however it is.
Yeah.
And just like there's a lot of passive men in our churches. So it's really cool to have people like you and like other friends that I have at church that are just like men that are like, hey, I'm taking responsibility for my family.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's what it sounds like you kind of did, and what changed the trajectory of your family.
Yeah.
When you found that mentor, was that someone that you were seeking out? Was that someone you kind of sought out when you were younger? Or did he kind of just step in for you?
Well, it's crazy how God honestly worked all of it out. My wife and I were like on the verge of almost getting a divorce, and we went to a marriage counselor. Sought out a marriage counselor. We did marriage counseling. The marriage counselor kept saying, "Hey, you should really go to this church." I go to this church. It's amazing. They have a lot of young people just like you. And I was like, it's a big church. Like, that feeling of going to a big church.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. And, we've been there. We've kind of had the mindset of we've been there, done that. Like, I don't want to really do that.
Yeah.
So we were kind of like church hopping and stuff like that. And we went to our church that we go to now. And, I saw the first worship, there, the first service there, and we were like, wow, this is actually really interesting. It's a big church, but what they talk about is pretty good. Like, and I ended up seeing one of these guys up there playing the electric guitar that I actually led worship with him at another church I used to lead worship at. Yeah, goes to show you that just because you lead worship doesn't mean you have a really deep relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, you might just be super talented.
Yeah, right. So, and that was me, man, seriously. So I saw him, I was telling my wife, I said, hey, man, that's our friend. We got to go see it, let's go say hi afterwards. So I went up there, I said hi. He's like, hey, man, how you doing? I was like, I'm doing great. He's like, oh, man, this worship team is awesome. You should join. And in my heart sunk. I was like, yeah, I'm not ready for that right now. Yeah. I'm really trying to work on my marriage, and I'm not in the right place to just go and start leading, because so he was like, nah, man. He's like, they have a worship pastor here. I was like, a worship pastor? I was like, I've never heard of no thing. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, he's like a pastor just for the worship team, and he meets with us. He holds us accountable, and that was one of the things that I really wanted was accountability. Yeah. And so he was like, I'll think about it. I'll think about it. I don't know. So months have passed later. I met one of the worship leaders at a wedding we were doing, and I started talking to him, and he was like, hey, man, you should join the worship team. I was like, oh, my gosh. I was like, I'll think about it, whatever. He's like, yeah, just fill out the form online and just, join. So I gave it some thought. I talked to my wife about it. I ended up doing it. Long and behold, the first, meeting that we had, I had it with the worship pastor, and I got to meet him. And I was like, whoa, like this guy is really something interesting about this guy, something different, something like, I really was drawn to him. Come to find out later on, he had the same story that I had.
Oh, wow.
And, I was kind of taken back by that, to be completely honest. I was like, no way, this is so interesting. Yeah. And so through that, he was the one that kind of encouraged me. He said, Christian, have you ever put God first in your life?
Wow.
I always...
It sounds like in the Christian, experience, you're like, oh, I've heard that. Like that's
sure.
Of course, I put God first in my life.
Well, it's funny because prior to that, the reason he asked me that question was, I'm an entrepreneur, a business owner, and I there's a lot that I have to do in a day, and so I wake up early. And at that time, I used to wake up early and meditate and do like all these crazy affirmations. I used to read self-help books, all this like stuff, you know, like that. In hindsight, looking back, it's like, it's not things that someone who believes in God would take their time to do, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not talking about meditation as like prayer and word. I'm talking about legit like sitting down with your legs, you know, crossed and all that stuff. And so so I told him that I you know was doing that, and he was like, he just encouraged me. He said, "Have you ever tried putting God first?" And I said, "You know what? No, I have never done that before." And, you know, it really made me think. And he's like, "I encourage you to do that. When you wake up in the morning, I want you to open your Bible. I want you to just start reading Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Just do that. And put God first, and see what happens." I said, "All right, sure." Started doing that, man, and my life has never been the same. Ever since.
That's so cool.
Because, you know, Matthew 5 is the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, Jesus's first sermon. And dude, the Lord has definitely used that to really help me understand who He is, and what He's done, and why He's done it. And that's how I got to know that spiritual mentor.
That's cool. Someone recently, like I was seeing this one therapist, and Christian dude, and he's like, "Hey, for the next 2 weeks, read Matthew 5, 5 through 7. He's like, read Galatians 5 and Colossians 3, 1 through 17 every day for the next 2 weeks. If you don't do this, I won't do it for you." And I'm like, okay.
Seriously?
Yeah, and I was like, oh wow, interesting. But through that, like, it was really healing for me as well. I was just like, wow, it was cool that guy knew, like, hey, if this guy doesn't get this in his head, then he's not going to understand the purpose of any of it. And I thought that was really, really impactful for me too. So that's cool that same.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool how you had the same sort of like challenge, you know?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we should be encouraging people to do. It's like, you know, you tell the gospel to somebody, you share the gospel with somebody, and, you know, that has the power to change a person in itself, right? It's not my message, it's God's message, right? That you're just telling somebody about, right? Who Jesus is and what He's done and why He's done it. And the fact of the matter is, like, after that, you really just point them to the Bible, which already explains all of that anyway. You know what I'm saying? And so it's so encouraging to hear that someone encouraged you to do that. And it's like, listen, don't take my word for it. Just read the Bible.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it really isn't, you know, it's really not that hard. Like, if someone truly wants to understand who God is, just open up the Bible and read it. It's amazing what God has said and has done just by reading His word, you know?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
So would you say that, like, obviously you had your videography business going already pretty early on in your life, right?
Yeah, like as soon as we got married, like I would say 2013.
And now, like, totally a different place in your life, but also like had that kind of turning point in your faith. Did that affect how you did business or change?
Oh, absolutely. 100%, dude. 100%.
Tell me, like, some of the biggest changes that happened, whether it was like internally or like even externally, how you perform.
With my business, as far as having a relationship with God?
Yep. Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
The way you lead people, the way I'm encouraged to lead people like Christ did, it's different. It's different how you serve others. It's a business, right? Yes, it's something that, you know, we do and we run, but my wife and I always say this, my first job is not business owner. It's not a boss. My first job is a fellow believer in Christ who wants nothing more but for someone to find who Jesus is and what he's done for me in my life and what he can do for your life. And so when I come from that part, that place, I serve people not in the way that, a regular business owner would, So I think that's more important. I mean, there's been plenty of times in our office where I've opened up and shared the gospel with, an employee, because in my mind it's like, this is important to me. This is my first priority. Second is how you do, working, for our company. But my first priority is, where are you at in your life, and where's your heart? How's your heart? That's my first priority. Everything else is secondary.
Yeah.
And so that's changed how I look at my business and how I look at people in my business.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I'm gonna be honest, obviously, yeah, there's still that part of me that, gets a little worried, oh man, if I share this with them, they're gonna think this and that. I'm only human, and it's very much a thought that passes my mind. But at the end of the day, when I look at what Jesus has done in my life and what I'm entrusted with, to employ other people with some an income, it's not mine.
Yeah.
This business that I have is not mine, and I have to remember that always, and remember that it's God who's given it to me, and I just manage it. I'm just the manager. So yeah, I mean, that's how that's changed.
I think it's interesting because just because you're asked to be on a podcast, or just because you're at a certain place that you've learned something, doesn't mean you've graduated any of those things. And I think it's interesting to go through life and how there's seasons that you really are just doing great, and seasons where you're just like, well, I just have to keep moving on because I know it's true, even if I don't feel it.
Yes.
How would you say that you've kind of navigated those times in the in-betweens?
I'm gonna be honest with you. It's been really rough. It's been tough.
Yeah.
Especially now, because I've developed this relationship with God, and there have been times where I'm not doing okay, and I still revert to my old self. Where it's like I handle things how I used to handle things, and not how I should handle them, which is giving it to God. Because there's still some sort of shame behind that and guilt behind doing something that is your old self and then coming to God, and I still have that those ideas, and I know that they're lies, and I know that they're wrong, and God is not a God that is just because you're his, we're called sons of God for a reason. When we put our faith and trust in Jesus, God adopts us into who he is and what he's done, and we become sons and daughters of God. And so you do something wrong or whatever the case is, and sometimes it can take a little bit for you to turn back. And I think that's why God has given us brothers and sisters like yourself, like you, and like other people in my life, that it's like you have to be able to open up and talk to someone and not isolate yourself. And tell others hey man, I'm really going through something right now, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm not okay, and just be, people have this notion, not everybody, but some people have this notion that Christians got it all together, or Christians have, they think they're better than everyone else. If anything, I'm with the person who doesn't have Jesus in their life. You know why? Because I'm still just as much of a sinner as they are, except that I know and I have someone that I can go to, which is my Father in heaven, and really ask him to, forgive me, but also to give me strength that I haven't, that he hasn't forsaken me. You know what I'm saying? And so I always remember the verse where it says, God gives grace to the humble, but opposes the proud.
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself gives you an idea of who God is. It's like, if you come humbly to God and like you've done wrong, like you've done, like it's not like I'm like pretending like I'm not doing anything. Like I know I've done, I've done wrong. I'm sensitive to, the things that I do that are wrong. But I know that I have a God who's loving. But it's like any dad. You don't want to disappoint a father. Your dad, your biological dad. You wouldn't want to disappoint them, or your mom, or whatever the case is. So, in those moments, you feel that they're disappointed. But God is abundantly gracious to those who are humble enough to admit that they've sinned against God, and that's a verse that I hold on to as far as the grace. God gives grace to the humble, but opposes the proud. And the other one, if you confess your sin, He's faithful and just to forgive you of your sin. And those are things that I have to remind myself, even now in the relationship that I am with, the maturity I've grown to in this relationship with the Lord is like remembering those verses, remembering those truths that God has given us through His Word.
For sure. And circling back a little bit towards the beginning, something you said early on, you said like, hey, if you want to see yourself, get married.
Yeah.
Something I think is funny, I had a conversation with my brother about this because he got married, I think like 6 or 7 years ago. We're twins,
Oh, you have a twin?
I do, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we're learning stuff.
What?
Yeah, so I have a twin brother. And, when you're a twin, everyone wants to compare you. Even if, like, your parents are, like, not trying to do that, everyone else is going to.
Right.
But, he got married a while ago. And he almost, like, didn't want to be in a relationship. Like, I was talking to him, like, bro, you like her, right? Yeah. And she likes you? Well, yeah. Then just ask her out. Like this dude, like he was fighting it and found the first girl he ever dated, like now his wife.
Wow.
And they got married pretty young, not crazy young, but pretty young. And I'm still single. And I was talking to my brother and he said something that he's like, he was almost reluctant to say it because he's like, didn't want to sound insensitive. He was like, sometimes God kind of gives us what we need to grow. And he's like, I would have never grown without my wife.
Wow.
But you're the kind of person who really like in your life, you've really dug in with relationships with people, with friendships, and you've done a lot of like self-assessment and you've said, well, but you really, when you love hard. So you probably would have not focused enough on yourself in that place. And he's like, I don't want to like say that's why or what, but he's like, it's interesting how God does. He's like, I don't know why I found my person. I don't know why it was so easy for me. Right. But I am thankful that I've been able to grow because of her, because I would not have without her. Right. And in my life, I'm like, I'm sure you always grow in life, but it was something where I'm like, oh, I could see that. It's not an answer I want to have. Right. But it's like, I see that, and I've seen in this past year where I've just decided to like, okay, God, I'm just gonna put you at the front. I'm not gonna wait for somebody. I'm just gonna put you right at the front, and I've seen like so much change in my heart of how I see people and how I see like the call that God's put on my life. And wow, I think it's when we get the focus off of our deepest desires that are like kind of just real surface level, and when it comes to like spiritual things, like God is so much deeper than any deep feeling we could have. That's right. But like the spiritual level of there's really some deep desires that are good. Right. Finding like a spouse is, I forget where it says in the Bible, but it's like, one man who finds a wife finds a good thing. It's not a bad.
It has when yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
A man who finds a good woman or a good wife has found favor with the Lord or something like that.
Yeah. There's a few different things like that where you're just like, okay, well, it's not a bad thing to want, but at the same time, I don't want it to be the ultimate thing. And God, would my ultimate thing be you? And my one mentor, he's like, hey, like when he got married, he was like, my wife had to be number 2 and God had to be number 1. He's like, because my number 2 disappointed me, my number 1 was God. But when my wife was number 1 at different places, then when she disappointed me, I was devastated.
Yep.
And so it's like, it's an interesting thing to think about, but it's something that I don't think a lot of people apply, even if they might say it.
Dude, Matt, that is 100% true. And I know that because that's how God has worked in my own marriage, like when I wasn't putting God first in my life, I noticed that, my wife didn't trust me as much. She didn't have, how men want to feel respected by their spouse, right?
Yep.
I didn't feel like I had that from my wife. And, I'm thinking like, oh, it's all her.
Yeah.
But the minute I started putting God first in my life, do you know how easy it was for my wife to be like, I trust you.
Wow.
And I respect you? Because all that my wife ever wanted was for me to put God first in my own life and lead her in that. And when my wife was able to see that in me, she is willingly wanting to do that.
Yeah.
And I tell a lot of guys who are married that, dude, I'm telling you, it is, like you will look at your wife so much differently when you put God first in your life. And you'll see how marriage actually works when you do it the way God has intended it to be. So, dude, I agree with that 100%, man, because that's even in my own marriage that I've seen God do that. And I don't know, it just, again, like I said, I'm so proud of my wife and what she's done with the women's Bible study that she started. I'm telling you, she would have never done that. And the fact that she's doing that goes to show you that God is real in my life and he's working in her life too. Yeah. So it's really cool to see my wife grow in that.
That's super fun.
Yeah. And not only just marriage changes you, but having a kid changes you too.
Oh yeah.
That's you mentioned something before where you were like that you're pretty much always growing and learning, right? And so I'm learning still obviously things with my wife, but dude, now that I have a daughter of my own, like I'm learning a lot being a dad, being a father to a child. So now there's another level of growth that is happening in my own life, just through having a relationship with my daughter, a father and daughter relationship. So as she gets older, she's going to be 2 next month, but as she gets older, it's like, there are things I'm going to have to handle and learn how to navigate things as a parent now, as a father to someone. Very, very different from having a wife,
Yeah.
So.
Now, has being a father affected how you see God and how your relationship with God is? Like. Yes. Yeah.
It has affected that, and there are glimpses of, wow, like could this be how the Lord is? And it's like you read the Bible, it's like, no, it is how the same love that I have for my daughter, or any of my any other children that I end up having in the future, it's a cajillion billion times more love that the God has for me and us as a father in heaven. So yeah, it definitely has changed my perspective on that. And even my daughter, when she does something wrong, like I have this immense amount of love for her. Like I know she's doing wrong, and I'm like, hey, you can't do that. But the way that I try to handle those things is to remind her how that I still have love for her, but she has to learn here, that she can't do these things,
Yeah, for sure.
But there's still love behind that. And so, just having that relationship with my daughter, I see the relationship that I have with God, and how if he says he loves us the way that he does, then everything that he does for us is out of love and out of his goodness. And so it's just interesting to kind of put those two together. I know that my love will never be as much as the love that God has for me, for my daughter, that I have for my daughter.
Yeah.
But I know that I can see glimpses of that in just my relationship with my daughter.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Do you want this any shorter in there?
I don't know. I can't see Jack. Oh yeah, that's good. That's good.
That's good there?
Yeah, that's good.
Are we doing anything with your beard or just fading it in?
You can fade it in, and you can. I mean, if you can, I usually do like a 2 on the beard, like shaving it down.
Yeah. So we're getting a little closer to the end of the haircut here, and something I was asking people. This would be kind of the turning point of the question, but I was asking people like, what's a piece of advice you'd give to your 14-year-old self? But now I'm kind of changing that to what's a piece of advice you'd give to your 20-year-old self?
Ooh. Piece of advice that I would give to my 20-year-old self. Honestly, know God and know life. Really, if I would have developed, and all in God's timing, right? But if I believe that if I would have developed a true, genuine relationship with God, I think my 20s would have been, would have looked way differently. And I would have looked at marriage way differently. But like you said, that God has a way of using things, in our lives to help us grow and to help us be pointed to Him, or be directed to Him. So yeah, I would say, know God, and then know God through His Word, and then you would know what true life really is. If I can encourage my 20-year-old self, that's the advice that I would give, because everything in my life now flows from that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
Thanks, man. Well, I'm gonna finish up your beard, and then we'll show you the haircut.
Sweet.
How's that look for you, Christian?
Okay, what matters, Co? Okay. All right. My boy.
Sounds good, dude.
That's good, brother.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Christian.
No problem. What do I owe you?
An attaboy.